Although I've been there now for over 50 years, you know, I still don't feel I belong there. Yeah, it's very, it's very bizarre.
At that age, at 15, did you, because of growing up in Cairo, summers in Dorshware in Lebanon, being from Jerusalem, really,
Yes.
did you feel Lebanese, Palestinian, Egyptian, American?
I didn't feel any of those. I mean, you know, everybody in the school, or nearly everybody in the school, made fun of my name. Ed said, what did he say? I mean, that was...
This is in America?
In America. Yeah, of course, in Egypt. I was, you know, it was a completely mongrelized atmosphere, the school I was in, with Armenians, Greeks, Saudi Arabians, Jordanians. You know, King Hussein was there. Michel Shalhoub, Ahmad Sharif was the head boy of the school. You know, we were all... First of all, first names were never used. We were always known by our last names. But in America, you know, I was an oddity. There weren't too many foreign. In fact, I don't think there were any foreign students. I was the only one in the school who had come from abroad, and it was difficult for them to reconcile my facility in music. My education had been much more advanced, although I was, you know, kind of a loafer, than the school I was sent to. And in fact, I was kept back a year because I was too young. I would have, I left Cairo after having finished the equivalent of 11th grade. And had I entered 12th grade in America, I would have graduated at the age of 16 and gone to university. And so everybody felt that I was too young. So I was made to repeat the junior year, which I did. And, you know, it was incredibly simple for me. Maths, I had already had 2 years of trigonometry and calculus and this sort of stuff. In English, I had read everything. And, you know, to be asked to analyze a play like Macbeth or The Emperor Jones, which was another one that we did in those days, or Sinclair Lewis, you know, it was child's play for me. And French was the language offered, and of course I knew French very well. So I had a very easy time of it academically, and very quickly shot to the top of the school academically. But in other ways, I was floundering the whole time. I mean, and all I could do was to try to retain bits of myself to get through the day. But I was overcome every day by homesickness and longing to be somewhere else. You know, obviously near my parents. And what my mother gave me, which was a kind of sustaining affirmation, which I didn't get in the school at all. I always felt I was delinquent.
Was it a boys' school?
Boarding school. Boys' school. And boarding school.
Religious affiliation?
There was a lot of chapel. I think it was 5 times a week. It was a school founded by D.L. Moody, the great evangelist. So there was a lot of emphasis on that. And I completely resisted it. I went through unscathed. I was clever at it. Everybody had to write a paper on D.L. Moody once in the junior year, so I wrote one. And I don't remember what I wrote. I just wrote nonsense, but it was, you know, I got an A or something. But that whole aspect of it, I had, of course, been very carefully brought up in the Anglican faith. And then I also, because of my mother's background, which was Presbyterian and Baptist, so I'd had that too. And so I went on Sundays. They were hell. You know, it was 4 times a day of church in Arabic and in English. And it's there too. I didn't retain any of the substance. I just remembered the forms and the words, which I liked, you know, for their own sake, not for what they meant, for the sound and so on. Anyway, back to Mount Hermon. So I couldn't wait to get out. The problem was in vacations, which were quite long, Christmas and Easter, I had no place to go. I had some relatives in New York of, you know, cousins of mine. But they were really equipped to have me, but they did. It was too far to go back to Egypt, except in the summer, because it takes 3 days to come. I went to America originally in 51 by boat, but flying in 52 took 3 days to get to Cairo. So it was something you could only do once a year. Luckily, my parents could afford it. So I'd go back, and I'd spend all the time dreading when I'd have to return, which I did, of course. And what I developed was a kind of, on the surface at least, a kind of hardened, I don't know what the word in English is, habile in French. a sort of semi-professional attitude to the things I had to do. All the time feeling miserable inside, you know, not exactly crying, but regretting one thing or the other, you know, missing my family, missing my my room, missing the language, which I didn't hear at all, Arabic, I mean, while I was there. And then over time I developed quite a sense of being able to do two things simultaneously. To carry on in the school, you know, getting all the things right, and then sort of going my own way underneath that. I mean, there was always another self where I could develop in fields that interested me, like philosophy, which I first became aware of at Mount Hermon through the chaplain. And I first read Kierkegaard when I was at Mount Hermon at the age of 14, and Plato I discovered. So they were always sort of a self-education. And in the formal aspects of education, I just became a pro, as they say.
Family were Protestants, so detribalized in Levantine terms, no longer belonging to one of the conventional...
Yeah, Orthodox, Greek Orthodox.
So they left that, so they're already cut off.
Yeah.
Then you're cut off from Palestine in 48, cut off from Cairo and your entire family in 51, in this strange new world. Where did you go for sustenance, for a company, for support? Which I know in the Middle East particularly, people don't think of themselves as individuals. They think of themselves as parts of something.
Yeah, I didn't have much of that. I didn't think I was part of a larger whole. So a lot of the time I was developing a kind of independence of my own, as I said, outside my main identity, which was, as I grew older, you know, I became a professor and a scholar, and so on and so forth. But I always had this other life, which allowed me to make connections with people. I mean, as I saw, it was useful or pleasurable for me. It's a kind of great luxury. Many years ago, I devised this scheme. It's a verbal one, where the difference between filiation and affiliation, where filiation is, you know, what you get from your inheritance and your background and, you know, being a son, which is what I was. Affiliation are connections you make when the others sort of fail or break down. And since that filiation for me had always been a problem, I really spent a lot more time affiliating, making connections with people through my work, through politics, across lines, always across lines, you know, with people who were quite different from me, and intellectually, people who were at the opposite extreme. I mean, that's the greatest pleasure of all, you know. People whom in everyday life, for example, I would have nothing to do with because it'd be so reactionary. But you know, to get from them or to somehow connect with them in ways that were sort of against the grain, that's been the greatest thing.
And who would you think of in this regard?
Well, I mean, the close friends I've had, you know, who have been so different from me. Well, like Iqbal Ahmed, who's an Indian from Bihar who became a Pakistani, came from a very devout Muslim background, who was a kind of wandering revolutionary. And here was I, you know, deeply embedded in the institutional life of the university. He never was. And, you know, we had these strange connections with each other through Palestine, through the Third World, where we both became known. He was a great orator, and he was so itinerant. He, you know, wherever he went, he would do interviews. He had connections with people. In my case, it was always my writing that preceded and gave me a kind of reputation. But we had this very close bond that was deeply unlikely if you look at me in terms of my background and where I came from. I mean, you know, Iqbal then became a friend of my mother. I mean, you know, he would come to our house. But it was a very unlikely thing that would never have occurred in my childhood. Then intellectually, you know, one of the great influences on me was an Italian philosopher that I read when I was about 20 called Vico, who was an 18th century Neapolitan, who was a professor of Latin eloquence. I think the single most powerful intellectual influence on my life has been Vico, Giambattista Vico, and there's nothing that we have in common. I mean, he was a devout, sort of Christian Latin scholar, you know, very choleric, seemed like a very unpleasant man. A lot of the people I've admired terms of writing, are deeply unpleasant. Conrad, who is the great figure of my sort of imaginative life, was a Pole who learnt French first after he left Poland as a 17 or 18-year-old, and then worked in the French merchant navy, and then became an English sailor, and became got his master's certificate as a captain when he was close to 30, and then became an English novelist. Also a deeply unpleasant man from all accounts that we have of him, but his work has haunted me. So those kinds of connections are the ones that really interest me, not the ones with people who are like me, who come from similar backgrounds. But as I grow older, I realize that there aren't any people who are like me in a way. That there's a kind of, as the English poet Gerard Manley Hopkins said, there's a wonderful line which has meant a lot to me. All things counter, original, spare. And I've tried to maintain that view of things, that where everything is original, and I've sought it out rather than trying to find likes. It's the unlikes and the asymmetrical and the unreconciled, which is also the core of the counterpoint, I think, the idea of the counterpoint.
With this richness of friendships and of interest, would it be fair to say that you really don't have any regrets about not having been able to stay in Palestine and not having been able to stay in Cairo and not being confined to that society from which you came?
Yeah, I don't have any regrets. I mean, because I don't know what it means. I mean, it's strange. I mean, my most intimate relationships now are with my family, my immediate family, my wife, who changed my life when I got married to her in 1970, because it was a re-establishment of contact with the Arab world. And of course my own children. But for the rest, it's been very itinerant, and I've had the best of it, I think. I feel very lucky that way and pleased. But the rest, which is, as I say, I don't own a house. I don't own a car. I don't have much property, except portable property. I mean, I like clothes. I like pens. I like pipes. Small things. I don't own any art. I've got thousands of books, but I don't. Then they coexist in no particular order. But they exist in my head. I mean, I can call up my assistant when I'm ill and tell her I want the book, and she say, "Where is it?" So I tell her it's on the 4th shelf, 6th from the. I can remember. I have kind of photographic memory for something. But so I don't have a summer house.
Do you?
I don't miss any of that.
Well, do you have the key to your house in Palestine?
No, I don't. I don't.
Did your family keep it?
In fact, when I don't even know.